All right. So that was DNS itself, keeping it up and withstanding attacks. Then DNS can assist attacks. WannaCry was really important. This was one of the big scandals. The NSA develops attack tools, which is highly questionable. In fact, the NSA sometimes creates vulnerabilities just so they can attack them. That was one of the many revelations that came out from Snowden and also from the cryptographic community. So it's highly controversial. But in any case, the NSA knows a bunch of vulnerabilities in software like Windows, and they don't tell the company so it can be patched. Instead, they keep it to use it as a weapon. And that, if they're going to do that, they have to keep it secret, and they failed at that. One of their contractors put it on a machine with Russian antivirus on it, Kaspersky. The Russian antivirus found it and sent it back to Russia, and the Russian government got it. And so they had the NSA's vulnerability, and so they used it to make WannaCry, which was ransomware, which spread around the whole world using an undisclosed Windows vulnerability and caused hospitals in Britain to go down. So it was really a big deal. And, all right, so this guy, Marcus Hutchinson, stopped this attack. He's still in America. He's doing podcasting. He was a British security researcher, and he analyzed the virus in Britain and found a domain name it referred to that was not present, so he bought that domain, and just by luck, that was the off switch. So before business days started in America, the malware was turned off, so it did not take down hospitals in America, but it did in Britain. So he was a hero. He came to give a talk at DEF CON and was arrested by the FBI, because before that, he had written some attack tools that were used to attack banks. So there was a long trial and defense, and he was unable to leave America for years, and now he became an American citizen. I guess he got resolved in court, and he's now a well-established security professional with a podcast and everything. He's a very nice guy, very interesting guy to follow if you follow him on Mastodon. And so that's, a lot of people have articles about him. There he is, Marcus Hutchinson. All right, so dynamic DNS allows you to change the IP address of your domain name quickly. And one thing, you can host a website on your home machine. Now, normally that would not be possible because your home machine is behind a layer of network address translation, and every time you connect, it might have a different IP address, so people couldn't find it. But dynamic DNS is a service that redirects traffic to your home machine from a cloud server that does have a fixed address. It then finds you wherever you are by having an agent on your machine that tells it where it is. Yeah.
Dynamic DNS is same as dynamic IP?
Yes. Yeah. It's a way to serve a resource from a dynamic IP with a fixed domain name. It just means there has to be a redirecting service that finds you and redirects the traffic to you. Yeah. But it also can be used to hide a malicious site. They can keep moving it around from machine to machine, because typically malicious sites are hosted on hacked servers, and people discover that and reimage the server, so they keep moving around. But they can keep adjusting the DNS record to follow it. Then there's fast flux DNS, which is another way to just change the DNS address frequently, so it's very hard to find the actual machine that is the source of a site that was serving up malicious or illegal content. And the packet amplification was a big one. The first one of these was the Smurf attack. In the early days of the internet, more than 20 years ago, you could ping a machine, but you could also ping a broadcast address. And it would then send traffic to every machine at that location in that IP address range, and they would all reply. So you would send a single ping to something like ccsf.edu at the broadcast address. It would then go to every machine on campus. Every one of them would reply. So a single ping might create 1,000 replies. And now what you do, since it's not using TCP, it doesn't have a handshake, so you can lie about the from address. So if you want to attack somebody, you put the target's address in the from address. You send it to the router, it sends it to all these machines, and all the replies go there. So this is packet amplification. You send one packet, but they get hit by 1,000 or 100. So even if you have a low capacity to create traffic, the target gets much more traffic. This is called packet amplification, and it's a huge problem. There are many services that have this property where a small request leads to a big response, and DNS is one of them. This DNS amplification, distributed reflected denial of service, is what this is called. So you send a small request to a DNS server, and the large reply goes to your target, who then gets flooded with traffic. Another thing that's nice for the attacker is they will blame this DNS service. they won't even know who the attacker is. So one of the many things you can do is you can dig any of yahoo.com, and that will give you a big response with a lot of servers listed in it. There's a lot of things that will give you a big response, bigger than the request. All right, and so in this case, the request is 69 bytes and the reply is 379 bytes, so that's about a 5 times amplification. There are services that give you much more, like 100. If you go to the IETF.org, in fact, I should have the looking glass open still. Yeah, so here, if I do, let me get that slide again. I dig any. Let's see if these any's work. Now, any is deprecated. It might not take any anymore. Any was the old system to just say, tell me everything you know about this company. So if I do any of, say, yahoo.com, it might not honor this anymore. We'll see. Nope, it still works. I'm getting all kinds of information. The mail servers, the IPv6 addresses, the DNS servers, the IPv4 addresses. You know, this is a big response. I just get all kinds of information. But notice that I don't get any of those signatures, none of those big cryptographic signatures, because Yahoo is not yet using DNS Sec, which we're going to talk about. However, IETF absolutely is. It's the Internet Engineering Task Force. It's the engineers that write this stuff. IETF.org is using all the latest cryptographic stuff, of course. So if you go there, it's going to give me an answer, and everything's going to have these resource record signatures, this long base 64 junk, then a sender protection framework address, which is used to get spam out of email, then a signature, then another one, NSEC, and another DNS key, another signature, text. You can see this is a lot of data. This is one disadvantage of the modern system where you have all these cryptographic signatures. The response is much bigger. So, among other things, it makes these amplification attacks much more powerful. I send a small request and I get a flood of data, which I could redirect to somebody I'm trying to take down. All right. Yeah, there it is. In this example, I send 28 bytes in, I get 4,000 bytes back. So that's a 45 times amplification. But it's typically transmitted over TCP, and that protects it from being used for this, because in TCP, I can't send the traffic to someone else. I have to send a SYN. It sends a SYN ACK, and I have to answer with an ACK. So I cannot send it to some third party. TCP will only send the traffic back to the person who requested it. So it doesn't produce this problem of distributed reflected DOS. All right, so I mentioned the original DNS had a limit of 400 or 500 bytes for the packets, and if you're going to use modern things like those cryptographic signatures, that's not enough, so they had to extend it. So normal max was 512 bytes. Their eDNS moved it to 4,096 bytes, but still over UDP. So that's one of the extensions to try to handle the more complex traffic. Then you can use a DNS just to deliver traffic. This is one that just used a Trojan to communicate over UDP, I think, which is a fairly common thing. All right, and the last one I mentioned is to use it as a defense. You can measure what's happening on your network by monitoring DNS. Every time, suppose you have a company, all your workers are working, but some of them are doing forbidden things, like going to games or porn sites at work, and you want to stop that. Well, every time they go anywhere, there's a DNS request to find that site, and the DNS request is not encrypted. It comes to your DNS server, and it has their IP address and the time. So you can just look and see where everybody went and when they went there. So you know which employee is doing the bad thing. This is very popular. DNS monitoring is a very common response. Also, it's good for botnets. If your machines are infected and they're phoning home to the command and control server, you can tell that from the DNS queries too. So it's typically monitored. So here, for example, is Conficker. Conficker was a worm that infected Windows machines for many years, and it had a whole series of these strange domain names, just randomletters.net, and you could predict them. They're not random, they're produced by an algorithm in the worm, and people reverse engineered it and figured it out. So you could recognize these domains going by, and in fact, they tried to take over control of it by buying these domains ahead of the bad guys. So they would then control the master command and control server. That's a pretty common way for researchers and defense people to take over botnets. Here's also, if you look at the number of requests, bots typically make a lot of DNS requests, far more than normal, because they're often exfiltrating data by DNS. if you want to sneak data out of a company, like credit card numbers and passwords or something, one thing you can do is encrypt it and then put it in these domain names and send it out as DNS requests, because that will not be blocked by the firewall because you have to let DNS requests through, but they are these long, stupid-looking names that are not realistic. It's one way to sneak data out of a network, and one way you can spot it is the infected machines just send a lot more DNS requests than normal. All right, so another thing you can do is use a service that blocks malicious DNS. The nicest one is OpenDNS. All you have to do is change your DNS resolvers to their numbers, 208, 67, 222, 222. If you use that to resolve domain names, then if you go to any malicious website or you get infected by malware, they will detect that and block the traffic. So it gives you a layer of security provided by the cloud that's easy to use. And if you pay for the pay service, you can then get a report on who's doing what at your company, and you can block other things that are not malicious that you just don't like games and social networks and stuff. It's a very nice service, and they got bought by Cisco a while ago, and so it's part of the Cisco company family of companies now. That's OpenDNS. So the Stormworm was a worm that used fast flux DNS, so it would mutate every 30 minutes, just a way to, so even if you try to block the IP address of the bad site, it will keep changing to make it harder for you to block it. Microsoft took over a domain to take over this botnet with authorization from a court order. There was arguments about this. Frequently, Microsoft has made mistakes here. They've taken over servers that had already been taken over by a different researcher in Europe. So they were actually interfering with somebody else's research. This is the problem. The different anti-malware researchers often collide and undo each other's work. All right. And then, of course, there's privacy. As I said, DNS monitoring shows everything you do. You can just run a Python script or use any variety of tools to monitor. You'll see every IP address, where they're going. And this is irritating. I mean, you may not be aware that every website you go in your browser is being broadcast to everybody near you in plain text. So if you use something like a VPN, that would prevent that if it's properly configured, but most of them are usually not properly configured, and DNS goes outside the VPN. So the fundamental flaw here is that requests and responses are not encrypted, and there's also no authentication. So not only does it not protect the data, it doesn't verify the integrity of the data. So as I mentioned before, someone's asking about DNS hijacking. You could have a server on a wireless network at a coffee house, and you could listen for a DNS request and send a fake response with the wrong answer, and they will believe it. They have no way to tell that your response came from a hacker instead of the real server, not unless you're using that DNS sec with those cryptographic signatures, which nobody is on the endpoints yet. All right. So that's an issue. And yeah.
You said that it's not encrypted. What if I'm in a VPN?
If you're in a VPN and it's properly configured, oh, thanks. Yeah. So this is good. Let me get this back. Sure. Good. All right. So if your VPN is properly configured, it'll route all your traffic through the VPN, and then it's all encrypted. If it's, however, not well configured, then it will encrypt only the website traffic, but not the DNS traffic, which is a common mistake. And then your passwords are not leaking out, but the DNS requests are leaking out, so it's invading your privacy to some extent. All right. So another problem is if your DNS just goes down and it's unavailable, then people can't get to your website, and of course that's a problem. And as I mentioned, if you have modified DNS service, if somebody is able to change your DNS servers by hacking into them, for example, then they can redirect traffic to dangerous websites. And then, of course, there's cyber war is another big issue. This is one of the many attacks that's used by nations against other nations, and these are the advanced persistent threat actors, military attacking other nations, which is a big deal these days, getting bigger and bigger. And as we know, the Russians interfered quite a lot in Estonia's elections, and they interfered with less effect in American elections, although that was generally done not by traditional hacking, but mostly by disinformation, false news stories and false social media stories. But in principle, they did try hacking into systems as well. It just wasn't the main way that they were able to have an effect on the election as far as anybody knows right now. So let's try another Kahoot, which should be, here it is, 1B. All right. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. All right, so what technique makes you link a DNS name to a portable device? Allows that. That's dynamic DNS. All right. All right, what technique makes packet floods stronger? That's distributed reflected denial of service. All right, what technology lets you have larger replies? Extended DNS. All right. All right, what measure blocks access to malicious servers? OpenDNS provides that service. Windows Firewall does not. Windows Firewall will resolve any domain you ask for. Microsoft does have a protection feature in Internet Explorer that blocks some things called secure something. I forget what it's called. But the firewall does not block malicious domains. Smart Screen. Smart Screen is Microsoft's thing that blocks malicious domains in Internet Explorer and now Edge. All right. So what DNS traffic is encrypted? Currently, none of it, in most cases. A few browsers are just beginning to add encrypted DNS, but most of it is still running in plain text. All right, what can you detect if you monitor DNS packets? Okay, you'll get every domain used. It's not the same thing as every web page used, because once you go to a website like samsclass.info, as you click around the pages, you don't need another DNS request to go to the various pages. And also, you'll get domains that are used by non-web services like email. You will pick up. So the right answer is every domain used. All right. So, all right, weak keys. Again, they'll have to tell me the real name if they want their points. And I see Junk Food John. Root, okay, I know from the past. All right, good. So, all right. Let me stop this recording just to keep things organized.